Welcome to the Click podcast. I'm Dani Watson, a mindset and manifestation expert and founder of The Click, a company that helps women overcome their fears and limiting beliefs to create a life and business that they love. Within this podcast, I will help you get clear on what you want, identify the blocks that are holding you back, transform your mindset and raise your vibration so that you can co-create magic with the universe. If you are looking to design a life that truly sets your soul on fire and manifest more success and abundance, then you are in the right place. Welcome to a brand new episode of the podcast. I am super excited because today I am joined by the gorgeous Alyse Bacine, who is a breathwork expert. I know so many of you listening are super intrigued about the breathwork space and how to include this into your business and your personal lives. So I'm really excited to chat with Alyse about this today. So thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Me too. So I think where I'd really love to start today is to really dig into what led you into breathwork.
Yeah, so it's been a very long journey for me. I actually discovered breathwork when I was 19 years old. So I was at the end of my first year in college and I was struggling. I was struggling with an eating disorder and anxiety, and I was just looking for answers. And, I found yoga first, and then I discovered breathwork because there was a breathwork class at the yoga studio I worked at. So I went to it, and nothing really crazy happened when I went to it, but I just knew that I was supposed to do it. I was super drawn to it, and I love the depth to it. I'm a Scorpio, and I don't really have time for anything that's not going really deep and digging underneath the surface. That's always been how I am. So I think there was that aspect of it, of digging into the subconscious and understanding things that people don't normally understand or talk about. Especially at that time, this was in the early 2000s, and no one was talking about breath work. I remember, my friends used to try to tell other people like what I do, and I would be like, just don't talk about it, because it was just like no one knew what it was and I didn't feel like explaining it. So we have a really beautiful breathwork community here in Philadelphia, and they train breath workers every year, and I did 4 breathwork training programs all in a row when I was in my early 20s. And then I did a teacher training program and followed different teachers all over, and I just became super immersed in it. And then it was always something that I did kind of on the side. I don't think at that point in my life, in my early 20s, I had the wherewithal to really start a business. But then I became a school counselor. I have a master's degree in counseling psychology. I was a school counselor for 10 years. And then in late 2019, I think I always knew I was meant to do more than be a school counselor. I knew that I had the ability to help people in a much broader, impactful way. So I started my business in late 2020, and initially I thought I was just going to be doing breath work with people, maybe one-on-ones, maybe groups, but then it quickly evolved into what it is now, which is, I've created my own breathwork methodology that includes my breathwork and my trauma clearing tools and my energy work. So, for me, as I started to work with people, I realized that coupled with the breathwork, I had this ability to help people very quickly heal from familial and ancestral trauma. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of coupled with my breathwork modality, and it's called the metamorphosis method, and it just has evolved. So that's kind of where we are now.
Yes, and actually this is great you've mentioned that, because I am so intrigued to learn more, and I've been having a look through your Instagram and trying to kind of learn more about this metamorphosis method, should I say. So tell me more about this. Like, what does it involve?
Yeah, so it originally started from my first group program that I created, which is called the Metamorphosis, which still exists. Mm-hmm. And I created these modules to disentangle yourself from your family relationships so that you could clear and heal, old stories and limiting beliefs that were holding you to the past and pinpointing core wounds, and then basically discover your purpose and what you're really meant to do. And when I created the program, I didn't really realize what I was creating. I thought that I was just creating tools for people to do breath work with. But then as people started going through the program, it was like everyone was healing these major family trauma wounds and ancestral trauma, and discovering their purpose, and then also downloading their own unique healing modalities and methodologies that they were meant to share with the world, and then creating businesses around them. So I was just like, okay, I really have something here. So then I really started to, put it into a methodology, which there's 3 components to it. It's these trauma clearing tools that I've created, which are based in pattern recognition and teaching people to draw parallels to pinpoint core wounds and clear them. And then, I have a process to help you navigate how to shift that through working with your inner child. And then I have a bunch of different things that I teach people on how to shift your energy. And then also the breathwork piece, which is coupled with channeling, because I channel. So the breathwork piece is coupled with very intentional, channeled messages that come through for specific things to clear and shift very specific wounds, like your mother wound or your father wound, or, I do a whole thing with people on birth story, which is the circumstances surrounding your birth from conception till 3 months. So we look at that as, how that impacted you and the energetic imprints you have from that. And then I also have an energy work process that I've created. That's the other component of it. So now I have a certification program where I teach people how to implement this process. It's very well-rounded because it really targets each component, like the mind, the body, and the energy field, which to me, if we really want to create long-lasting results in clearing trauma and sustaining it, we have to go get to multiple levels. So that's really the purpose of it.
Okay, now I feel like I've got a gazillion questions.
No, it's a lot. Sometimes when I tell people about my methodology, they're like, whoa, that's a lot. I'm like, yeah, but if we want to if we want to get results, we got to get in there. You know what I mean?
Yes, exactly. So, okay, so let me understand this properly then. So your metamorphosis, this was originally sort of your process that you were taking your own clients through, and you've realized, okay, I've got something super powerful here. I want to be able to train other people in this. And now actually people can take the certification, which includes this trauma work and going into things like past lives, which I also want to dig into with you on this episode, and then the breath work as well. Tell me more about the channeling though. So when you say channeling, so this is sort of receiving messages from the universe, from source. And when this happens for you, tell me more about what this looks like.
Yeah, so it's interesting for me because I don't think, I'm sure you know this as a coach, when things come really easily for you, you don't realize that it's not something that's happening for everyone. And then when you have to teach it, you kind of have to reverse engineer it and be like, wait, how did I do this? Yes. And that's kind of how channeling was for me. It was just always something that came super naturally to me. But also I think it's because I have been practicing breath work for 23 years. And to me, breath work is one of the most powerful ways to tap into your channel, because it not only clears whatever is in the way, but it also brings you right into connection with your higher self. So I think for me, that was really the catalyst to me feeling always super connected to my channel. And then when I started working with people with breath work and then creating the metamorphosis, I started creating these breathwork sessions, like these recorded breathwork sessions where I would just channel. So for example, if my breathwork session around the mother wound, I literally just tap in and then I'm just guiding you to tap into that energy, that relationship, that wounding, and then shifting it. And a lot of times, I don't know what I'm going to say. I know what the intention is, but then I just kind of tune into to me, the way I describe it is like tuning into a radio station. Like I just tune into this higher frequency. And, you know, I went through so many iterations of this in my life. Like I have been connected to different energies that I channel. But like now at this point, I feel like it doesn't really matter. Like I'm just tuning into the highest frequency available, and then I'm like allowing that to come through me in whatever way it needs to come through me. So that's kind of how it works.
Okay, so this is super interesting. I want to sort of ask a little bit more about this, and I think mainly just for myself as well, because I found that from, let's say when it's creating content, for example, like I felt that there's been times when I've been really just connected to source and connected to something bigger where I'm not having to think about anything and it just flows out. And I feel like I've kind of experienced that channeling, but I feel like I can't really pinpoint what it is. I've tried to like reverse engineer. I'm like, well, what is it? Like the moments that I've been connected to it, and it's felt so easy, because people have asked me like how you've done this. And I can't teach you this because I don't even know for myself. So how did you kind of unpack all that for yourself to kind of understand, well, what is it that's really working for me, so that you can then kind of help others do that as well?
Yeah, that's a great question. And this is something that I really love talking about. And I'm actually getting ready to do a mastermind around this, because to me, this is incredibly important for people to understand. So what I've found is that there's a direct correlation between trauma and opening up to your channel. So what I started to notice with my clients is that every time we would clear a deeper layer of trauma, or we would pinpoint and shift, you know, a deeper core wound, their channel would open up. And all of a sudden, it's like the thing that they thought they didn't know, whether it was like, you know, what I want to start a business, but I don't know what I would do. And then when we clear the trauma, it's like, it's right there. They know exactly what to do, you know? So I have found that there's this direct correlation between the trauma or just any, and it doesn't, and when I say trauma, I just want to clarify, it doesn't need to be this big dramatic thing. Like, yes, there is bigger traumas, and there is, you know, what I call like relational trauma too, which is like sustained trauma over time based on what you did not receive in a relationship. So, you know, and that creates trauma as well that is nuanced, and there's different layers to it. But sometimes it's really just about a smaller little nuance or little shift or little story or belief, or, you know, a way that you are thinking about something that is boxing you in, and all you kind of need to do is unhook that, and then you open up to stuff. So this is what I found for people, is that as soon as we can pinpoint whatever story or belief or idea they have that is stopping them from opening up, then it opens up and they're able to tap in. And I've seen that over and over and over again with clients, especially because I've seen so many clients really tap in and bring through these very unique modalities that combine, you know, everything that's in their zone of genius, and then bring that forward into their businesses. So I think there's very much a direct correlation. And the way that I see it is, you know, when you have a wound that you're carrying that you're not conscious of, it almost creates a blind spot, right? Because if you think about vision in the overall sense, if you are not looking at something that is within yourself, but it's there, it's going to create something that you can't see, right? It's almost like a blind spot in front of you. Or if you think of a car with a blind spot, it's like a place that you can't see. So you're not going to have full access to all of you, right? But as you continue to open up and look at those things and become aware of them and bring them into your vision, then you can see clearly, right? And you can see more of who you are and what you're meant to do. So to me, in all of the work that I've done, you know, working with traumatized children for 10 years and now working with adults, I am very sure that there is a very direct correlation between these two things. And that's kind of, you know, how I see opening up to that.
So interesting. So it's almost like it's kind of this energetic block, and then going into the trauma and then healing that at the root, it kind of clears that space. And all of a sudden people like have all of these answers and tapping into their creative genius, which I love, because I think something that we see with our students who are, training to be life coaches, it's they're often almost become too dependent on relying on expertise or getting support or asking other people questions. And I think there's nothing wrong with having an expert to guide you, and I love being able to do that for our students. But for me, it's way more powerful if they can tap into their own innate wisdom and tap into the answers themselves, because that's always going to lead them on the path that's right for them, rather than being distracted by what other people are doing and what's working for somebody else, and allowing their business to be influenced by that. It's like, sure, some things do work, but it's that intuitive inner wisdom, I think. So it's beautiful that your process is helping bring that out. When it comes to those wounds that we're kind of really like tapping into, what do you see as sort of some of the common wounds that are coming up for the clients you work with?
Yeah, so there's pretty much some very basic core wounds, because I like to just distill things down to its simplest form. Mm-hmm. So, based on usually your relationships with your parents, you will internalize some core limiting beliefs, which are, I'm not good enough, I'm not enough. And then also, I'm wrong, there's something wrong with me. And then also the abandonment wound as well. A lot of people experience this on multiple levels, whether they were actually abandoned by a parent or just like having a parent that was not emotionally or mentally there, but physically there. So a lot of people experience that on some level too. So I would say those are like the main ones, and then there's tangential or variations of that, but like that's essentially what it ends up coming down to, is that you feel like you're not good enough, there's something wrong with you, or you're not enough. And then that will get projected onto pretty much every relationship, and that's one of the key components of what I teach, is teaching people how to recognize what your core wounding is and what your relational patterns with your parents were, so that you can actually utilize your close relationships or romantic relationships to heal those patterns, because you know how to look for them in the mirror of your partner. And that is that's probably the most direct and efficient way to heal it. Because when you see how you show up in relationships and you see how those patterns show up in relationships, then it gives you really great information as to where you're still in the pattern, where you're projecting, and how you can clear it. So that's one of the things that I love teaching people how to do, because it's just a very fertile ground to create transformation if you know how to use it.
Yes, amazing. So when you kind of have identified this pattern, so let's say somebody has witnessed that they've got a wound and they can kind of see that pattern that's visible within their life, what is that process then to heal it? Is that the breath work itself, or is there something else that you're using there to heal and clear that pattern?
Yeah, so it is the breath work, but then it's also the trauma clearing tools. So like first recognizing the patterns and then drawing the parallels. So I teach people to draw parallels within their relationships. And it doesn't even have to be like a relationship. It can also be your business. It can be your relationship with money. It shows up everywhere. It's pervasive usually. Mm-hmm. Like when you hit that core thing, it's like pervasive everywhere. So I show people how to recognize it in the different places so that you can shift it. And then the first thing that we do is we acknowledge the inner child, because I teach people to understand that when you are triggered by something, it has nothing to do with your current reality. And if you think it's about the situation, you're missing the mark. If you're triggered, it's your inner child coming up to say, I need to be healed and reconciled. I am hurt and I need to be acknowledged, right? So I teach people to quickly, instead of making whatever trigger they have about the situation, to quickly recognize that it's your inner child and deal directly with that, so that we're dealing with the cause instead of the symptom. And then I teach them how to reparent their inner child, bring them into the conversation, and then I have different steps that I take people through to shift their energy into their present self, their highest self. I have this thing that I call your highest self avatar, which is just like your present self, your most powerful self. And I teach people how to shift their energy to that after they recognize and acknowledge, you know, the trigger, the inner child, and what is happening there, because we can't skip that part, because then we're just suppressing. So we have to like honor and acknowledge what's actually happening. And then once you do that and you have that integration and embracing of the part of yourself that you were previously ignoring, then you can have this time where it's like, okay, now I feel complete with that, and now I can shift my energy into where I desire to be instead. So it's really about teaching people how to understand what's actually happening instead of being confused by what they think is happening.
I love that, because it's actually taking radical responsibility for your own life as well. It's rather than like being triggered by something and getting into this sort of blame mentality or sort of victim mentality. It's actually saying, well, you know what, I can recognize my part to play. And actually maybe it was, you know, there's maybe other people involved there as well, but actually taking it back to that inner child world, it makes you be able to feel like you're in control to change your situation rather than just being a victim to your triggers. So I absolutely love that. I'd love to know more about going into past life trauma, because I know that your work explores that a lot, which I am also really fascinated with. So tell me a little bit more about what past trauma involves.
Yeah. So, you know, it's funny because I'm actually not someone who get super into like, oh, I was this in a past life, or I was that in a past life. I don't like, that is not my thing at all, because I don't really see how, like, where that gets us. You know, I think that like, if there's some kind of really traumatic thing that happened and it's affecting you now, and like you need to know about it in order to move forward, that I totally get. But, you know, that's not part of my work. But the reason why I started teaching this, and I actually have a program called Past Lives and Money that's coming up actually next month, is what I started to notice from the women I was working with is that there are 4 past life archetypal energies that literally come up for every single woman when she decides to start a business. And I started noticing this with every single person. And I'm like, oh, like, you know, I'll have the woman who, and I'm sure you've heard this too, where she's like starting her business and she's like, I really want to do this, but I just hate social media. I just like don't want to show up on social media. I hate social media. And I'm like, no, you don't hate social media. You're just, you have a fear of being seen, which originates in the witch wound, where it's like you were ostracized or killed for sharing your spiritual psychic gifts. Literally comes up for every single person. Yeah. And they think it's about that they just don't want to show up online. I'm like, no, that's not what it is. Right. So there's that. And then there's like these past life imprints of lack and scarcity that comes up for everybody when it comes to starting your own business and going out on your own and making money for being you. So, and you know, the past life thing that I just want to say is that the way you can tell the difference between like past life wounding and, you know, family trauma, for example, is past life wounding, it feels much more pervasive. It feels like an energetic imprint, and you're not going to associate it with any kind of memory or belief or story or person. It's just going to feel like an overall energy that you might not be able to put your finger on. And half the time people don't even recognize it, which is why I teach about it. Because like I said, someone thinks that they just don't like social media. They don't know where that actually comes from. So what I found is that there are these more pervasive archetypal energies that people will come up against, especially when you start your business, because, you know, the business forces you to grow and forces you to look at all of these things, right? So there's that one. And then there is the fear of something terrible happening. So this is like a collective trauma that we've all experienced from past lifetimes. It's literally just like imprinted in the collective, where it's like natural disasters, war, famine, like that type of stuff. So that will come up in the business as well. I noticed that come up for myself really like a lot in the beginning of my business, where I was just like kind of in the state of like bracing for everybody to leave and all the money to go away and like, you know what I mean? Like just some kind of disaster. So that one's a really big one too. And then the other one is the discomfort with like standing out from the crowd and thinking differently from other people and the lack of safety within that. And that's something that comes up for a lot of women as well. I know that came up for me. So yeah, so the way that I look at past lives is we're just looking at what do we actually need to know about this that affects us now that we can utilize to grow. And that's kind of what I found is that there are these very deeper, pervasive archetypal energies that will come up to be shifted, but they feel much more like collective energies. And the way that I see it too is that as so many women, you know, like you and I are coming forward and creating businesses and making money just for being who you are, it actually is this opportunity to shift this collective frequency around like our power and the way we make money and just like the general frequency on the planet. And as we move through and are aware of these different energies, we get to consciously shift them and it creates like a larger energetic shift.
So interesting. I mean, I wanted to ask you about this because to be honest, I've not really dived into past life trauma or anything like that before. And my husband and I, we both went to an energy healer a few months ago, and he's had this really irrational fear of like the house burning down, like to the point where he was kept waking up at night. I was like, this is ridiculous. Like, and he was, you know, like nightmares and just like, you know, having like smoke detectors everywhere. And we have a real fireplace in the house. And he was like, if we'd had it lit that night, he was like, you know, he couldn't sleep. I was like, this is just so bizarre. And he went to this energy healer and it was nothing was mentioned about the fires. He went for something different and she brought this up. She's like, actually in your past life, she was like, I see you were an Amish and you had a family and actually all of your family died in a house fire. And he was like, oh, okay. And so she did a lot of work around clearing that, but it was fascinating. So ever since that, and it's, you know, the miraculous thing is that irrational fear that he's had is just completely gone. It's disappeared. So whatever she did in that session. So ever since then, I've been fascinated with past life stuff. And a lot of what you said, I think really resonates as well. I want to dig into the sort of the trauma side of the work that you do, because a lot of women listening to this will perhaps be already in the coaching space. So something I know that you're passionate about is making sure your work is trauma informed. So what does that mean so that you can really, I guess, safeguard the women that you're working with? And I guess what practices can you integrate into your work to make sure that your work is trauma informed?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I am super passionate about this. And I did an episode on my podcast recently, and I know you're going to be on my podcast too. Yeah. It's called Reclaiming Consciousness, but I did, and it's called Let's Raise the Standards in the Coaching Industry. And the reason why I called it that, yeah, it's a great one to listen to because it's about this topic.
Yeah.
But I break down why, like what happens inside of relationships and what could potentially happen inside of a coaching relationship when we have unconscious wounds that come up that can cause codependency, because this is something that I see all the time with, you know, clients who will tell me about experiences with other coaches and then other colleagues that tell me, you know, experiences that people have had. And I, of course, like am an expert on relationships and those underlying dynamics. So I can see very clearly, like when someone is not aware of their stuff, that it can easily come up inside the coaching relationship and damage it. So inside my certification, I teach this as well, as just like how to manage your own energy inside the relationship so that you're not bringing your stuff to the table. And that's very important. I feel very strongly about this because I think that as coaches and practitioners, you know, obviously we all did this because we want to help people, but when there are things that come up that you are not aware of that are actually your triggers or your things, and then you end up thinking it's about the other person, it can be really damaging to the relationship. So that's one piece of it. And then the other piece is being aware of what trauma actually looks like. So I think this is important because you could be, for example, as a coach, you have a client who, is maybe moving slowly, or, she will show up and be really into it and want to do all the work. And then she kind of like goes missing for a couple weeks. And then you're like, what the hell? Like, I need to hold this person accountable. Like, I'm going to call them out, or I'm going to do this, or I'm going to do that. Well, like, we need to be able to also understand that that could also be a trauma that's happening. Like, for example, when someone has a really serious abandonment wound, most likely if their parents weren't there for them, they will self-abandon. And I've seen this with so many people where they don't even realize they're doing it. It's actually a trauma response. So as a coach or a practitioner, you would want to be aware of that, or at least be aware that there could be something else going on other than this person is just not showing up, right? So sometimes it can be even more damaging than if you're like calling them out or being like, why aren't you doing this? Or continuing to tell somebody to do something that is not actually going to be beneficial for them because of whatever trauma has come up for them. So I'm not saying that every single coach needs to know everything that I know about trauma, but knowing how to recognize that potentially something could be happening, and then potentially either suggesting that they get other help, or just knowing how to navigate it in a way that's not going to be more damaging to the relationship, that's really important. So being able to just have an awareness of what potential trauma coming up for people could look like, because also, like I said, in this space, everyone is growing. So their stuff is going to come up. So we really want to be aware of that. And then also beyond that, another huge important piece of being trauma informed is being incredibly dedicated to doing your own personal growth work and continuing to do your own personal growth work. That has to be number one for everybody when it comes to being trauma informed, because like I said, being aware of yourself, your stories, your triggers, so that you can remain neutral inside of your client relationships is incredibly important, because your job is not to give them advice based on like shit that happened to you that was bad. You know what I mean? And of course, it can be helpful to share stories and illustrate points to help people learn. But any time where you feel like this pull to like make sure somebody does something, or make sure something happens this way, it's usually because something is triggered inside of you. So it's really about being able to learn how to see what's coming up for yourself and being able to put it to the side so you can show up in neutrality and hold space for somebody in a safe way. And then also having the wherewithal to be able to go back and get support with what came up for you. And I think that having this awareness in the coaching space is incredibly important. And then, I think so many weird patterns and stuff can come up for people, when it comes to power or leadership, or however people start showing up as a coach that creates unhealthy or unbalanced dynamics. We just have to be aware of that stuff, because it's not conducive to the growth that we want to create.
Yes. And I think what you said about the self-abandonment piece, I think is so relevant, because, we see this often with our students who will take on clients and like, why has this person ghosted me? Like, what should I do? And I think the natural response from a coaching perspective is, okay, my role is to keep them accountable here and actually call them out, where they're not showing up for themselves, they're not showing up for their dreams. And actually that's just taking things at surface value. And often it's kind of really being able to peel back the layers and understanding there may be something deeper going on there. So yeah, I love that you mentioned that. And before we go, I really want to talk more about the relationship between breathwork and money, because, I love the topic of money and I love helping women become wildly successful, and I love it when a woman's empowered. So what is the relationship between breathwork and money, and how can breathwork really help people step into their financial power?
Yeah, that's a great question. And, money, like everything else, is a relationship. So if we can look at money as a relationship, because, when I talk about finding what your core relational wounds are, like when you find what that is and how that creates a lens through which you're seeing the world, that's the same thing you're going to project onto money, right? That same wounding. So if you're, bracing for something terrible to happen all the time, that's how you're going to feel when you look at your bank account. It's like, oh my God, what terrible thing is going to happen, or whatever it is, right? Or if you have the abandonment wound, you can either be expecting money to not show up for you, expecting not to be supported by it, or you can abandon it by just completely ignoring it and not having a conscious relationship with it, right? So it's very nuanced, and I think it's helpful to look at it from that relational perspective. But to bring it back to the breath work is a very direct way to access the subconscious mind. And a lot of the beliefs, thoughts, and stories that we have around money are in the subconscious, and we're probably not aware of it. So when we use breath work to access the subconscious, we can have an awareness of like, oh wow, I've been holding on to this belief that, I only can do things for money that require me to suffer, right? And then even if you have a business, you'll create suffering inside of that in order to make money, right? So when you have an awareness about it, then it's like, oh, I get to choose a different relationship with money, and then you can start to do that. So I think the breath work will give you access to things that you might not be aware of inside of that relationship, so you can shift it. And then on top of that, it just gives you a ton of momentum. Every time someone does the breath work, it's like they just start moving and growing so fast, and the things that they desire come a lot easier. So it's really helpful in that sense. But then also, like I mentioned before, it gives you access to your channel, which to me is, especially if you're a business owner, your like number one resource when it comes to making money. Because I have found that for me, I love channeling and downloading really fun new revenue streams and creative ways of making money, because there are infinite ways to bring in money. Literally, especially if you're a business owner, there's countless, endless possibilities of how you could bring in money. And when you're connected to that and you're intentionally like, okay, what is another really fun revenue stream I could create? Or what is another really cool way I could structure my business or my program in order to bring in more money? And like, you have access to that, and I love coming up with fun new ways to create different revenue streams, or just fun ways to deliver content in a new way that creates new revenue streams. So I think that's a really big piece of it too, is elevating our relationship with money so that it becomes fun and expansive, and we stop looking at money as a problem or a limitation, and just start looking at it as something that we get to utilize and leverage to facilitate your vision and facilitate what it is that you want to create, instead of it being this burdensome, heavy thing.
I love that. And I'm just thinking as well, even things like the sales process, I'm just thinking back to, I don't really do any of our sort of onboarding sales calls anymore, but back when I did, I'd always have to leave sort of this space. And it wasn't specifically breath work I was doing meditation, but actually a big part of meditating for me is focusing on the breath. So maybe I was doing breath work without actually realizing that that's what it was. But I found if I didn't do that, I'd feel really stagnated on the calls, and it felt like I just couldn't get my energy like to the level that it needed to be. Whereas if I took that time before my discovery calls, it was almost like a channeling experience where the call just flowed, and it was just this really like organic conversation, nothing felt forced. And majority of the time that would always be a yes when the call was kind of in that type of energy, versus this sort of stuck, heavy, stagnated energy when I just came onto the call and I'd been busy doing something else previously. So yeah, I can kind of see like there's a lot of dots that have been connecting with me through this call, which I love. Listen, I feel like I could literally chat for you for hours on end. And I think so much of what you've shared with our audience today, with myself, has just been so eye-opening and so interesting. So I'm sure there's lots of ladies listening that would love to dive deeper into your work. Where should they head to?
Yeah, so you can find me on Instagram at Alyse_breathes. And there you can, or my website, AlyseBreathes.com. And both of those places you can find, I have a free download that is 5 ways to use breathwork for better client results. So for your coaches, that's a great download for them. And it also includes a guided breathwork session, audio recording, and a how-to video. So that's a great thing to go sign up for. It's totally free. And then also I have my Past Lives and Money program coming up next month. So if you want to dive into those archetypal energies I was talking about and learn how to not only shift them, but also really utilize that energy to grow your business instead of it being something that holds you back, that is the place to do that. So that's another great way to, dip your toe into my world.
Amazing. And what we will do is, just to make sure everyone's got the right links, we'll link everything in the show notes as well, including your Instagram and all of your links to your freebies and things. But yeah, honestly, thank you so, so much for coming on. And yeah, it's just been such an interesting conversation. So I really appreciate you coming and chatting with us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Thank you. Bye. If you're wanting to build your own successful online coaching business, make sure to check out Freedom, Abundance and Impact, our free 10-day business and mindset course for coaches and aspiring coaches. To access, simply head to wearetheclick.com and click free course in the menu.